Charisma is a dangerous thing. In the hands of the right person, it can create dynasties that shine through as beacons of civilization. Leaders, people who inspire hope, confidence, and above all exaltation, can apprehend the scum of the earth. But in the wrong hands, charisma can destroy lives, leave countries ravaged, and, on the rarest of occasions, nearly annihilate the world itself. Charismatic villains are the most dangerous kind because you can't help but like them just a little bit. And maybe that's the reason people often look at Griffith's body of work and are willing to give him a pass on all the heinous things he's done. You'll often hear the phrase, Griffith did nothing wrong, or Griffith isn't evil being bandied about online, but is that really true? Is Griffith just a charismatic leader doing what it takes to give salvation to the world? Well, that's exactly what we're going to investigate in today's video. So, spoiler warning for those of you who aren't caught up with the manga, because there will be quite a few coming your way shortly. The Shining White Falcon of Light. What the world of Berserk thinks about Griffith. Griffith's introduction to the series is a little confusing because he doesn't make his debut as a human being. The very first arc of Berserk takes place after he becomes a God Hand member, so the manga's journey is really all about discovering what went wrong between him and Guts. And the reason why that journey is so interesting is because of when Miura actually gives us a glimpse of who Griffith used to be. The White Falcon's first canonical appearance was during a flashback from the final chapter of the Black Swordsman arc. It opens on a field of corpses littering a fortified hill where a man's silhouette asks another if he's still alive. When he gets an affirmative response, the man claims his comrade has the luck of the devil. As the two men come into focus, we learn that it's Guts and Griffith, at a time when they were far younger than during their encounter in the Slug Count's castle. After pulling Guts up, Griffith gazes at the carnage beneath them and breaks into a monologue about the worthlessness of war. He calls his fallen enemies martyrs to a merciless god. He correctly points out that on the battlefield, the life of a common soldier is worth less than a piece of silver, and that in the end, they, like most of the people in the world, were subject to the whims of a handful of nobility and royalty. Of course, even a king can't do as he pleases, for he's bound by customs, traditions, and laws to carry out duties that might not be to his liking. Griffith's recognition of the true lack of free will in the men who were supposed to represent its zenith is a powerful thing, because we all know that he's correct on some level. None of us can live life exactly how we please. There are always going to be factors outside of our control that will prevent us from living on our terms. Griffith's recognition of these flaws in the system, especially at his age, is a powerful thing to see. He chalks it up to fate and says that death is unfair because circumstances don't allow people to realize their full potential. Griffith believes that in life, there are a few people who, unrelated to their social class or standing, act as keys that set the world in motion. These are the golden elite in his eyes, and his quest was to discover his place among them. What was he destined for? Could his actions set the world on a different path? What was his place in the grand scheme of fate? These were the questions that plagued him, and Guts was the first person he shared these thoughts with. Griffith could never understand why he was so vulnerable around Guts, but we could. The man thought of him as a true friend. Even Guts' internal monologue during this flashback sequence says that at that time, Griffith shined through as he was something beautiful, noble, and larger than life. And indeed, that's true to a large degree for the man that he was. Griffith does admittedly have a pretty inspiring origin story. He was an orphan who grew up so poor that he couldn't even afford a slice of bread at times. And yet, he set his sights on the grandest goal that a commoner like him could ever aspire to: kingship. Griffith would often play with his fellow orphans on the cobblestone streets of his birth city, and he won many a piece of junk and trinket during those games. But ever since he fixed his eyes on that castle in the sky, he's been making himself capable of and moving towards achieving the impossible. Griffith is pretty much self-taught and self-trained. He learned how to read and write without a teacher, trained at swordplay with no master at arms, and as soon as he reached adolescence, he got to work on a plan that took literal years to work out. Griffith started a modest mercenary band with a group of thieves and a miner, which he grew to nearly 500 strong by the time Guts joined up with them. Along the way, he picked up Casca, and his treatment of her was what made us see the good in him. Griffith saved Casca from being assaulted by a nobleman and then chastised the perpetrator for thinking he was entitled to something just because of his status. He gave Casca the sword and the blanket that inspired her to become his second in command, and this inspiring nature was what made men flock to him. He promised them all the gold and glory they could ever dream of, and a camp where all their dreams were welcome, asking for only one thing in exchange: that they deliver his dream to him. If it were any other man asking mere mercenaries to risk their lives attempting to hijack a kingdom, they'd have strung him up, divided his loot, and been on their merry ways. But Griffith's charisma, and more importantly his genius, made it very hard not to believe in him. The thing about Griffith was that despite being a man of humble birth and no proper military training and no real avenues to kingship, his strategies had never failed him. Bragging about having an undefeated streak to intimidate your enemies is one thing, having an actual undefeated record speaks for itself, and your enemies fear you before they even face you. That's the kind of mercenary army Griffith had turned his Band of the Falcon into. You could see it in the faces of the men that first attacked his forces during the Golden Age arc. Guts' side was supposed to capture the fort in 3 days. It had been 3 months and they were yet to reach the enemy's center. To prolong a siege like that, you need to be insanely tactical, and insanely tactical is exactly what Griffith was. During his first raid as a proper Falcon, Guts took note of just how far ahead his new leader had thought. Griffith attacked an enemy camp under the cover of night using a stream to cover their approach and then implementing the perfect exit strategy. Even Guts was impressed with his ingenuity, and he'd been a mercenary his entire life. It was this military prowess that allowed Griffith to integrate himself with the royal court of Midland and side with them in their 100-year war against the Tudor Empire. Griffith managed to defeat 3 of Tudor's most elite army units in the Black Iron Rams, the Blue Whale Knights, and the Holy Purple Rhino Knights, all with the participation of his band alone. He captured the seemingly impenetrable fortress of Doldry and brought an end to the 100-Year War, rising from commoner to viscount to general within a very short period of time. He was beloved by the commoners for liberating their kingdom from a ceaseless conflict, and respected and admired by the commanders for his unparalleled battle prowess. His men respected him and swore undying loyalty to him. By all accounts, he was far more dignified than he should have been and more clever than he ever let on. He knew the game he needed to play, and he played it well, ensuring his victory at all times. Yet, it was in that pursuit of victory that we saw another side of him, a side that ended up becoming his only truth. For all the brilliance of his tactics and the adoration of the commons, there were certain things that were simply out of Griffith's control on his path to kingship. The biggest uncontrollable factor was his social status, because despite rising to the rank of a general within Midland's regular army, he was still of common birth. He had no blood ties to any royal family, even a fake one that he could leverage to stage a rebellion. His only hope was to marry into one and gain power of attorney over time, as it were, and luckily for Griffith, Midland was the perfect target. Though the king had been married twice, he had only one child, and that too a woman. Princess Charlotte was 16 at the time Griffith met her, and yet the king had never even entertained the suit of another for his daughter's hand. Griffith knew that the timing couldn't be more perfect if he designed things to be that way, so he immediately got to work on making the princess fall for him. It's more than a little shady that he didn't reciprocate her emotions even a little bit, but at this point in the story, we were still rooting for Griffith. Him getting Charlotte to marry him would have been the most natural and bloodless path to kingship that Griffith could have ever dreamt of. He knew what waited for him if he stuck to the warrior's way. Years before he joined up with Midland, Griffith served under a perverted governor called Gennin. Gennin had a taste for boys, and Griffith knew his natural beauty had attracted the old lecher. He used it to arrange a deal where he got a crap load of money, and Gennin got to spend a night with him. It was an ugly deal, but one he brokered because he couldn't, in good conscience, keep getting his men killed. Griffith admitted that he felt no responsibility for the deaths of those who died in his service simply because he never compelled them to join him, they did so of their own volition. And yet, he also knew that if he kept on the mercenary's path, not only would his journey be prolonged, it would be littered with far more corpses than it already was. Griffith had lost a teenage boy who joined the Falcons because he wanted to become a knight and a fighter like Griffith during his campaign under Gennin, so you can see the genuine remorse in his eyes. He wonders whether the boy died fighting for his dream or if his own dream was what got him killed. Either way, he knew he needed to limit deaths to maximize his prospects, so he made himself unclean alongside his brethren, joining them in their shared misery. Things started to go horribly wrong when the story shifted from the battlefield to the royal court, because swords don't work to advance your cause there as much as words do, and also subterfuge. And it's the last of those things that shows us just how far Griffith was truly willing to go in pursuit of his dream. The dark falcon that lurks underneath. The real face of Griffith that few know. When a man of Griffith's birth aspires to the throne of a king, he must be prepared to do more than a few unsavory things. Griffith knew that when he got working on his dream, death was just the beginning. Compromise would be the least of his problems. He'd have to do things that he probably never imagined himself doing, and the unsettling thing about that is the absolute lack of hesitation in him when such an opportunity presents itself. With Gennin, one can argue that yes, his end goal was to save more lives and secure funding the band could never hope to secure without causing a lot of unnecessary bloodshed. He never even consulted with his comrades or let them in on what he was up to. Casca happened to see him with Gennin, and Griffith had to explain himself to her not by choice but out of compulsion. When Guts became a Falcon, Griffith saved his life during his first mission because he told the man that he didn't want to lose such an excellent soldier after having acquired him so recently. It felt like an excuse to keep their budding friendship from distracting him, but the thing is, in Griffith's conscious reality, that's exactly what he did. To him, everything and everyone is simply a tool to acquire his dream, and this becomes glaringly obvious once he's promoted to the rank of Viscount. Up until that point, Griffith had been on the outside looking in, forced to prove his worth with victory after victory, while hundreds of soldiers died in the process. But with his promotion, he was on the inside now, and like any other royal court, Windham Castle was filled with snakes. Griffith had known that he would face persecution at best and be hunted down at worst because of who he was and how he gained peerage. To the commoners, he'd be a beacon of opportunity of what can happen when a man as ingenious as him saves a war-torn land from certain annihilation. But to the nobility, his very existence among them was an affront. The King of Midland was a practical man who recognized the role of merit over heritage in the new world that he was trying to build. This is why he was so eager to collaborate closely with the White Falcon, even granting him the honor of guarding his escort during the annual autumn hunt. This honor was usually reserved for the highest military group in Midland, the White Dragon Knights, so Griffith's Falcons getting the details signaled that the king had decided to abandon tradition in favor of success. Had the two men agreed on more than just war strategy, perhaps there could have been a peaceful way for Griffith to gain his kingdom, but that was never going to happen. For starters, the moment he started outshining the other military orders of Midland, he became a target of their commanders and captains, with one man in particular holding a massive grudge against him. General Julius was not only the leader of the White Dragon Knights, whom Griffith's Falcons had all but replaced, he was also the king's brother and heir to the throne of Midland. Midland, like every other kingdom in the world, favored male primogeniture, so unless the king had a son of his own body, Charlotte's ascension was all but a technicality. Julius was the real key to the succession, and he had a son that Charlotte was supposed to marry. Prince Adonis was a sweet and dutiful boy by all accounts, and though a formal proposal hadn't been made yet, it was customary to keep a royal wedding confined within the royal family. So Adonis and Charlotte were pretty much meant to become the next royal couple of Midland, until Griffith entered the scene. Julius was mad with the White Falcon for displacing him in the military hierarchy, so he plotted with another courtier, Minister Foss, to assassinate Griffith. He sent one of his crossbowmen with a poisoned dart to shoot Griffith with during the autumn hunt, but the attempt failed, and it only pushed Charlotte closer to Griffith. What's worse is that Julius exposed himself trying to confirm the kill, and Griffith immediately made him with his borderline terrifying predatory instinct. See, Griffith had always known that he would have to watch his back once he made it to this stage in his plan, but he didn't expect it to happen this early on. Still, Julius coming for him brought to light the real reason he trusted Guts like a brother, and that's because he thought he was rough enough to handle the shadier half of his business. It's true that having Guts out on the field had increased the Falcons' win record by a significant margin, but the real reason Griffith recruited him was because he knew Guts would do whatever was asked of him, no matter how unsavory, so long as it was part of his duty. He had a gift for reading people's nature, and he knew that a lifetime of being a mercenary must have made Guts go through things the men in his band would simply not understand. That made him more discretionary, and he could be trusted with doing things like kidnapping little girls and assassinating Griffith's opposition. Soon after Julius tries to kill him, Griffith sends Guts to his abode to return the favor. The plan is a success, but it doesn't exactly go off without a hitch. Guts is interrupted by Julius' son Adonis, who he ends up killing as well in an act of self-defense. When Griffith learns that both Julius and Adonis had passed away thanks to Guts' efforts, the smile that adorns his mouth is chilling. He knows that this is essentially a two-bird, one-stone situation come to life, and he has no problem reveling in his victory, while Charlotte, who's standing just beside him, is shocked by the news of her uncle and cousin's passing. Speaking of Charlotte, while Griffith's actions towards her are subtle and harmless, the intention with which he approaches her clearly isn't, and that is made evident by his reaction to receiving that news by her side. He doesn't care about Charlotte's emotions or the fact that he has slain the very people he wanted to call kin, he only cares about his path opening up. Should anyone choose to stand in his way, he will end them, as he ends his enemies on the battlefield, and that's real. After securing Doldry, Griffith susses out Foss's treachery using his predatory instinct and has Guts hire some kidnappers to take his daughter hostage. He then uses Foss to get the secret cabal that was out to finish Julius's work, led by his lover, the Queen herself, trapped in a location of his choosing so that he could deal with them all at the same time. Griffith burns all the conspirators that plotted to kill him after faking his own death and coldly declares himself the victor of this war. He then intimidates Foss into working with him in the future with a smile that lets Foss know that Griffith knows exactly where his daughter lives and how to get to her for the rest of their lives. In one of his rarest moments of reflection, Griffith asks Guts whether what he's doing is cruel, considering he's just stamping out the opposition with ruthless efficiency. But when Guts reaffirms his actions by reminding him that they're in service of his dream, Griffith simply smiles. This is perhaps the greatest mistake Guts has made in the entire series, because had he not justified mass murder in pursuit of a crown in that moment, maybe things would have played out differently. We'll never know, because they don't. Much of Griffith's plans before the eclipse were about the ends justifying the means. He let Gennon have his way with him because it protected his men and got him the money that he desperately needed. He charmed Charlotte into loving him because that was the easiest and most bloodless path to kingship. Griffith didn't care about killing everyone around her to become her white knight, because as long as he had her affections, he held the key to the kingdom. And then Guts decides to leave the Band of the Falcon to pursue his own path, and what does Griffith do? He just throws it all away because he can't process emotions. Casca once told Guts that the burden Griffith carries is so great that he doesn't have the opportunity to take his foot off the pedal. If he was going to break, he was going to break hard, and whether he knew it or not, Guts was now the nexus of Griffith's decisions. Be it his discretion or unparalleled battle prowess, Guts had become equal to Griffith's dream without either of them realizing it. So, when he decided to leave the Falcons, Griffith decided to fast-track his plans at the risk of treason. He further earned the ire of the king by exposing his incestuous feelings towards his own daughter, and spent an entire year getting tortured to the brink of insanity underneath the Tower of Rebirth. All of these decisions he blamed on Guts, because in his mind there was no way anything could distract him from his dream. If that happens, Griffith's entire purpose is lost, so when Guts leaves him, Griffith essentially gives up on his dream as well. It wasn't because he couldn't carry on his undefeated streak like before, because politically and militarily speaking, he was in the best position he'd ever been. He had the backing of the King of Midland and was now one of the foremost commanders in one of the world's most significant armies. He rid the royal court of his enemies, and he had already worked his charms on Charlotte well enough to ensure her loyalty to him. The Lodestone exchange was nothing if not proof of that. So, Griffith's decision to do what he does after Guts' departure is entirely on him, and the fact that he just shifts blame in its aftermath is indicative of the darkness that has always lurked within him. He didn't just assassinate his political rivals and dupe the princess into falling for him, he tore it all down because one soldier didn't do what he wanted him to do. That kind of ego is exactly what makes a person eligible for becoming a demon in this world, and once Griffith realized the power that this new path offered him, he embraced it all too eagerly. Do the ends justify the means? Why Griffith is pure evil incarnate. Everything up until this point in the video had addressed Griffith's actions before he became a god hand. This is because you need to understand the kind of person he was to grasp the kind of demon he is. Griffith wanted to take it all. He wanted the whole world in his hands, and if we're being honest with you, if he were patient, he'd have had it all as a human. The White Falcon certainly possessed traits that would make a great king in the future. But Griffith, as he was, wasn't exactly a good candidate for the role, so even if he married Charlotte at that time, it wouldn't have gotten him anything. There were still things that were out of his control, like the actions, thoughts, and feelings of other people that were bound to interfere with his reign. What he desired was unity on a cellular level, a world where people bowed to his authority without question and allowed him to breathe life into his vision for the future. It's rather disturbing that the only way he could have had that is by sacrificing all those he had fought beside since day one and then proceeding to unleash hell on Earth. It becomes very clear that the only thing Griffith truly values in this life is power early on in his escape from imprisonment. He constantly tries to force himself back into the action as Guts and co save him from Wild and his Black Dog Knights because he hates feeling useless. Griffith grows even more frustrated by the closeness between Guts and Casca because to him, they weren't allowed to behave that way without his leave. Griffith owned these people and their fates, so for them to do as they pleased, it didn't sit right with him. He even tried assaulting Casca to re-establish his control over her, but when she hugged him out of pity, he knew he'd lost it all. Instead of trying to live out his days as a broken and pathetic man, Griffith chose to transcend and become a demon so he would finally have the power to make those who made him feel powerless suffer the same fate. His first act as a god hand is proof of his evil nature because he had no reason to desecrate Casca the way he did other than to establish his superiority over Guts. Griffith once saved this girl from the same fate he subjected her to, and when she lost her mind, did he care? He didn't even seem bothered by it because his goal was to hurt Guts, and he'd accomplished it. With his newfound powers, Griffith set about putting into motion a plan to get his kingdom and ensure that he'd be in control of his own destiny, and that was incarnating into the physical world and then merging it with the astral world. As a God Hand member, though Griffith was immensely powerful, he also didn't technically exist. He was a body of thought now, a subconscious entity, a whisper on the wind. In order to achieve his goal, he needed a body so he could claim a crown, and to ensure that nothing, no pesky incestuous fathers or virtuous little lords got in the way of it, he needed to plunge the world into circumstances that he alone could navigate. He got them both when the egg of the perfect world triggered the incarnation ceremony at the Tower of Conviction, and later, when he himself sliced open twice reincarnated Ganishka with Skull Knight's spatial sword, but both of these things came at a cost far greater than what happened during the eclipse. The eclipse saw the Band of the Falcon getting sacrificed, which, after all the desertions and years on the run, numbered a few hundred at best. The incarnation ceremony killed thousands, and the death toll of the Kushan invasion could have realistically been in the millions. All those deaths occurred solely so Griffith could build his kingdom, and even with his God Hand powers, he needs to lie and manipulate his subjects to keep their faith. He has revealed the true nature of the war demons to them, but hasn't told them that he's the only thing keeping them alive. He has started reclaiming land for humanity and proposed a walled territory system to ensure Midland supremacy in the New World, but he hasn't said what will be lost in the process. None of his counselors know of his destruction of magical targets like Flora and Elfhelm, and poor Charlotte doesn't even know that she's sleeping with a demon. To put it simply, Griffith's Falconia is a house of cards that can come crumbling down at any moment, but you know what its most fragile card is? The fact that Griffith is using his God Hand powers to fake being Berserk Jesus. One of the main reasons people submit to him as the savior today is because he allows those that fall in his service to have one last communion with their loved ones. It's proof that the afterlife exists, and it secures men's loyalties at a level beyond things like nationalism. Griffith has made himself the center of the Holy See religion, when in reality, he's sending all of those souls straight to hell. Ewell Wolfflame once asked him where all the liberated souls go once they're released, and Griffith tells him they go where all become one. Trust us when we tell you that that's Berserk speak for the Vortex of Souls, aka the Abyss. To round it all off, he's kidnapped Casca, brought her to Falconia, and put her in some kind of trance just to cover his unintentional transformation into the Moonlight Boy. So, to put it simply, Griffith is manipulating the psyches of thousands of humans and apostles alike, making them believe they're on the path to heaven, when really, they're just batteries for the generator that is hell. He broke the world just to remake it how he saw fit, and what he's doing with his subjects goes beyond good or bad. He's actively giving them hope for heaven when he's condemning them to hell. So when you ask us if Griffith is actually evil or not, our answer is gonna be yes, because evil men prioritize self-gain at the expense of everyone around them and the world at large. And Griffith does both those things quite literally. Marvelous verdict! And that's it for this one. This is Wizard Wheezy signing off, but let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more Berserk content, and we'll see you in the next one. Until then, keep struggling, strugglers.